She had $1 billion in the bank, a penthouse above the clouds, and a husband who promised forever. And at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, all three stopped meaning anything. Security cameras caught her walking into her living room, setting down her phone, and then nothing. No movement, no calls. Just silence from the 53rd floor while the city kept spinning 30 stories below. When nobody could reach her by midnight, they stopped calling executives and started calling the one man on staff still clocked in. A maintenance worker named Daniel Carr, 32 years old, single father, a man who fixed broken things for a living. Nobody expected him to find what he found. Nobody expected what happened next. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now, drop a comment with the city you're watching from, and let's see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Daniel Carr had learned a long time ago not to get his hopes up about anything after midnight. Late-night calls from building security were never good news. They were burst pipes, tripped circuit breakers, elderly tenants who'd locked themselves out, or occasionally something worse that he tried not to think about on the elevator ride up. He'd been working maintenance at Harlow Tower for 3 years. He knew every floor, every quirk in the HVAC system, every elevator that groaned a half-second too long between the 14th and 15th floors. He knew the building the way you know a place you've spent too many hours in. Not with affection, exactly, but with the kind of tired familiarity that comes from showing up and doing the work, regardless of whether anyone noticed. Tonight, Frank at the security desk had looked uncomfortable when he called. That alone was enough to put Daniel on edge. Frank was ex-military, 61 years old, the kind of man who described a broken arm as a minor inconvenience. Uncomfortable, for Frank, meant something was genuinely wrong. 53rd floor, Frank had said, keeping his voice low, even though the lobby was empty at this hour. Ms. Harlow's unit. She's not answering her phone, not answering the door. Cameras show she came in around 9. Nobody's seen her since. Building protocol says we send someone up to do a wellness check after 2 hours of non-response. If there's been any... He stopped, cleared his throat. If there's been any reason for concern... What kind of reason? Frank slid a printed security log across the desk without making eye contact. Daniel scanned it. 4 calls from someone listed as R. Harlow, personal, between 8:15 and 9:02 p.m. Then at 9:34, a call to building security from Ms. Harlow herself, voice described in the log as distressed, requesting that no visitors be admitted to the 53rd floor under any circumstances. And then nothing. No more calls. No movement detected by the door sensor after 9:47 p.m. Why me? Daniel asked. Shouldn't you call? I don't know, someone from her personal staff? Her assistant? Her assistant hasn't picked up. Her personal security contractor clocked out at 6 and isn't responding to pages. Frank finally looked up. You're the only staff member I can reach who has master access to that floor. I'd go myself, but I can't leave the desk unattended, and my backup doesn't come in until 3. He paused. I'm not asking you to do anything except knock on the door, confirm she's alive and not in need of emergency services, and come back down. That's it. Daniel looked at the log again, distressed. He thought about his daughter, Maisie, 7 years old, asleep right now at his mother's apartment 4 miles east of here because he'd picked up a double shift to cover last month's shortfall in rent. He thought about how tired he was, how his back had been bothering him since Wednesday, how he had a full morning ahead of him starting at 6 a.m. Okay, he said. I'll go up. The elevator to the 53rd floor required a separate key card. Daniel had one. Building maintenance had master access to all floors, though in practice he'd only ever been up to 53 twice, both times for routine HVAC inspections when the unit was empty. The floor was its own contained world, a private lobby the size of most people's living rooms, marble floors, a single set of double doors at the end of a short hallway. No other units. The entire floor was one apartment. He knocked. 3 times, firm but not aggressive. Nothing. He pressed the intercom button beside the door. Ms. Harlow? This is Daniel Carr from Building Maintenance. Security asked me to do a wellness check. I just need to hear your voice so we know you're okay. You don't have to open the door. Silence. He tried again. Ms. Harlow, I'm going to use the master key if you don't respond in the next 30 seconds. I'm not trying to intrude. I just need to confirm you're all right. He counted to 30. Then he used the key. The first thing he noticed was the glass. There was a wine glass, or what had been a wine glass, shattered against the far wall of the foyer, the dark stain of whatever it had contained already drying in a wide arc across the pale cream wallpaper. A second glass lay on its side on the entryway console table, its contents pooled and dripping slowly onto the marble floor below. A bottle, nearly empty, stood crooked beside it. The foyer opened into a living room that was, in the most straightforward possible terms, destroyed. Not destroyed like a break-in, destroyed like a person. A floor lamp was knocked over, its shade dented. Papers were scattered across the white carpet, physical papers, printed documents, which struck Daniel as strange because everything about this building suggested a world that had gone entirely paperless. A laptop lay open on the coffee table with its screen dark. A designer blazer, the kind that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly salary, was crumpled on the floor beside the couch like someone had yanked it off and thrown it. 2 throw pillows had been knocked off the couch. A decorative bowl that had probably sat on the sideboard was now in 3 pieces on the floor. The orchid that had been in it lying on its side, dirt spilled around it. Someone had been very, very upset in this room. Daniel stood in the entrance and didn't touch anything. His first instinct was practical. Check every room, confirm she was physically okay, assess whether emergency services were needed. He moved carefully, announcing himself as he went. Ms. Harlow? It's Daniel Carr, building maintenance. I'm inside the unit. I'm just checking rooms. Kitchen. Empty. Lights left on. A mug on the counter with cold coffee in it. Untouched. Dining room. Empty. Untouched. Master bedroom hallway. He called out again before he turned the corner. The bedroom door was open. The bed was made pristine, hadn't been slept in. The walk-in closet door was open, and the light was on inside, but no one was there. The bathroom door was ajar, lights off. He stood in the middle of the bedroom and turned slowly. The room felt like a hotel room. Expensive, perfectly arranged, deeply impersonal. There were no photographs on the nightstands, no clutter on the dresser. A single book on the nightstand, a business strategy title he recognized from airport bookstore displays with no bookmark in it. Nothing soft anywhere, nothing that looked like it belonged to a person rather than a catalog shoot. He went back to the living room. There was a second door off the far end that he'd registered but not yet tried. It led, he assumed, to the terrace. The handle was unlocked. He pushed it open. The balcony ran the full width of the unit, maybe 40 feet across, a glass-railed platform suspended over the city. The night air was cold and clear. The city spread below in that particular mix of orange and white that always looked more beautiful from height. There were 2 lounge chairs, a fire pit table that wasn't lit, and a row of potted trees along the glass rail. She was sitting on the floor, not in a chair. On the floor against the far rail, knees pulled up to her chest, feet bare on the cold stone. She was wearing a white silk blouse that had come untucked on one side and a pair of black slacks, and her hair, dark, shoulder-length, was loose in a way that seemed completely at odds with every photograph Daniel had ever seen of Vivian Harlow on the lobby's framed press features. In those photographs, she was always precise, contained, the kind of person whose collar was never crooked. She was not contained right now. Her mascara had tracked down in 2 clear lines under her eyes. She was holding her phone loosely in one hand, screened down against her thigh, and she was staring at the city below with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read, not actively crying, not calm, somewhere in the terrible middle ground between the two where a person is too exhausted to do either. She didn't look up when he came out. "I'm not jumping," she said. Her voice was flat and rough. "Before you say anything, I know what this looks like. I'm not jumping." "I didn't think you were," Daniel said. He stayed near the door, didn't move closer. "I'm Daniel, maintenance. Frank downstairs asked me to check on you." "Good for Frank." She still didn't look at him. "Are you hurt?" A short, humorless sound, not quite a laugh. "Define hurt." "Physically." "Are you physically hurt?" She turned her head and looked at him then, and he registered her face properly for the first time. 30 years old, he knew from the building files. She looked younger than that right now, and older at the same time. in the particular way that people do when something is stripped away whatever surface they usually present to the world. Dark eyes. A small cut on her right palm, dried blood, probably from the wine glass in the foyer. "Your hand," he said. She looked down at it like she'd forgotten it was there. "Glass," she said simply. "Can I look at it?" She stared at him for a long moment with an expression he recognized. It was the look of someone deciding whether they had the energy to object. Apparently she didn't. She held her hand out, palm up, without moving from her spot on the floor. Daniel crouched down. The cut wasn't deep. It had already stopped bleeding, just a 2-inch diagonal line across the heel of her palm. It needed cleaning and probably a bandage. "I've got a first aid kit in my bag," he said. "It's not serious, but you should clean it." "Okay." "Okay, as in, you'll come inside and let me get the kit?" She looked at the city for another moment. Then she unfolded herself from the floor. Slowly, stiffly, like someone who'd been sitting there for a long time, and stood. She was taller than he'd expected, probably 5'8" without shoes, which she wasn't wearing. She held her cut hand slightly away from her body and walked past him into the living room without saying anything. She stopped in the middle of the living room and looked at the mess like she was seeing it for the first time. Or maybe like she'd forgotten it was there. "I had a bad night," she said, to no one in particular. "I can see that." Daniel unzipped his maintenance bag and found the first aid kit. "You want to sit down?" She sat on the couch, moving the one remaining throw pillow aside automatically, and held out her hand. He pulled up the coffee table and set the kit on it. "You don't have to do this," she said. "I know. You could just verify I'm alive and go back downstairs. That's what Frank asked you to do, right?" "Probably, yeah." She watched him open the antiseptic wipe. "So why aren't you?" He thought about it for a second. It was a fair question. "You've got a cut on your hand and you've been sitting outside in the cold barefoot for what looks like a couple hours," he said. "I'm not going to just leave that." She was quiet while he cleaned the cut. He could tell from the slight tightening around her eyes that it stung, but she didn't pull away or make a sound. "You're not what I expected," she said finally. "What did you expect?" "Someone who'd be very carefully not making eye contact with me." She glanced up briefly. "Or someone who'd be recording this on their phone." "I'm not doing either of those things." "I can see that." A pause. "It's strange." He pressed the bandage down and sat back. "How long have you been out there?" She looked toward the balcony door. "I don't know. Since around 10, maybe." She registered his expression. "I wasn't going to do anything. I just needed to. I couldn't be inside. The walls felt like they were getting smaller." "What happened?" It came out before he thought about whether it was his place to ask. He expected her to shut it down immediately. "That's none of your business. You're dismissed. Please go." Because that was the only register he knew her in, really. The register of someone who operated entirely in terms of what was appropriate and what was not. Instead, she looked at her bandaged hand. "My husband left me tonight," she said. "Or I found out he'd already left in every way that mattered, a long time ago. He just made it official tonight." She said it in a very even voice, the voice of someone reporting facts. "He took most of what he wanted from our accounts. Legally, he had access, everything was joint. And he's been in contact with 3 members of my board of directors for the past 4 months, working against me." She stopped. "I found the emails tonight, on our shared computer. He didn't even bother to delete them." Daniel didn't say anything. There wasn't anything useful to say. "The thing is," Vivian Harlow said, "the thing that I keep sitting with, I'm not even sure I'm surprised." Her voice stayed level, but something shifted underneath it. "And I can't figure out if that's the most rational response I've ever had to something, or the saddest." The honest answer, Daniel thought, was probably both. But he didn't say that either. "I built this company from a licensing deal. I made it 23, she said. "I took out loans. I worked 16-hour days for 6 years. I made decisions that cost me friendships and sleep and—" She stopped. "I was good at it. Am good at it. I know I am. And I married someone who I thought understood that, who I thought was proud of it. And it turns out what he was actually doing was watching, very patiently, for a moment when he could use everything I built as leverage." She picked up her phone from the cushion beside her and then set it back down without looking at it. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that. You don't have to figure it out tonight, Daniel said. She looked at him like the sentence had landed somewhere unexpected. That's a strange thing for the maintenance man to say. It's true, though. A long silence. Outside, the city hummed its ambient hum, traffic 30 stories below, a siren somewhere to the east, the faint sound of wind against the glass rail. I threw a wine glass at the wall, she said. I saw. I've never done anything like that in my life. First time for everything. She made that sound again, the almost laugh. This time it was fractionally more genuine. You're not what I expected, she said again, quieter. You mentioned. I mean it as a compliment. I know. She leaned back against the couch cushions and tipped her head back and stared at the ceiling. The studied composure that must have been her default expression was entirely gone. What was underneath it was something much more ordinary, a person who was exhausted and hurt and trying very hard to decide what to do next without any clear idea of what that was. What do I do? She asked. Not to him specifically, just out loud, to the room. I don't know, he said, but I don't think you should be alone right now. She looked at him. You don't even know me. No, he agreed. I could have you fired for being in here. You could. She stared at him for another moment. Then she said, unexpectedly, Are you hungry? Daniel blinked. What? I haven't eaten since noon. I was supposed to have dinner at a client event tonight, but obviously I didn't go. She looked toward the kitchen. I have food. I don't particularly want to be alone in a kitchen at midnight, but I also don't particularly want to be alone, period. And you're here. She seemed to realize how this sounded. It's fine, he said. I could eat. He wasn't actually sure he could eat. His stomach was uncertain from the lateness of the hour and the general strangeness of the situation. But it seemed like the right answer. The kitchen was enormous and well-stocked in the way of kitchens that belong to people who have a chef service on call and don't actually cook much themselves. Vivian Harlow opened the refrigerator and stared at its contents with the expression of someone who had not had to make their own food decisions in some time. I genuinely don't know what half of this is, she said. My nutritionist stocks it. You have a nutritionist who stocks your fridge? Don't judge me. I'm not judging you. She pulled out a container of something and read the label with a slight frown. This is apparently a curated grain bowl with micro-fermented vegetables. She looked at him. Does that sound good to you? It sounds like something that costs $40 and tastes like a parking lot. She stared at him. Then she laughed. A real one this time, short and surprised. The kind that comes out when something is funny, despite everything else. She put the grain bowl back. There's eggs, she said. I know what eggs are. I can make eggs. You don't have to, she shows. I'm already here. He moved to the stove. Sit down. You've been on your feet. She sat on one of the counter stools and watched him find a pan, watched him crack eggs with the automatic efficiency of someone who'd made a lot of breakfast for one adult and one child and had stopped thinking about it as a task a long time ago. He found cheese in the refrigerator, actual cheese, not whatever micro-fermented situation was in there, and butter, and bread that wasn't too old. You cook like you've done it a lot, she observed. I have a kid, he said, 7 years old. You cook or she eats cereal for every meal. You have a daughter? Maisie. Where is she tonight? My mom's place. I picked up a double shift. He glanced back at her. She's used to it. Something shifted in Vivian's expression. How long have you been doing it alone? 4 years. She absorbed this. Her mom left. He kept his voice matter-of-fact because that was how he'd learned to say it. Not because it didn't mean anything, but because giving it too much space in the telling just made it heavier. When Maisie was 3, we'd had a rough couple of years financially, and it wasn't what she thought she was signing up for, so she went. He moved the eggs in the pan. It was hard for a while. It's less hard now. Vivian Harlow was quiet for a long moment. I'm sorry, she said finally. That must have been awful. Parts of it were. Parts of it weren't. He found 2 plates. You learn what matters pretty fast when everything else gets stripped away. He set a plate in front of her, scrambled eggs, toast, Nothing fancy. She looked at it like it was a foreign object. I haven't had plain scrambled eggs since I was a kid, she said. How old? 7, 8, maybe. My parents we weren't wealthy. We were very much not wealthy. She picked up a fork. I used to eat scrambled eggs on the school bus because there wasn't time to sit down in the morning. What happened between then and here? He said it without thinking, then caught himself. You don't have to answer that. No, it's... She took a bite and chewed. A small thing happened in her face, some combination of surprise and something older. That's actually good. It's eggs. I know what it is. She took another bite. What happened between then and here is I decided very early that I was never going to eat breakfast on a bus again. She said it without drama, just as a fact. And I made a lot of decisions in service of that. Some of them I'm proud of. Some of them She stopped. Some of them I'm sitting here at midnight thinking about. They ate in silence for a while. Outside the kitchen window, the city did its nighttime thing, indifferent and constant. What did you find out? Daniel asked. About your husband. The board thing. What were they planning? She set down her fork. A proxy vote to remove me as CEO. They needed a certain percentage of board votes to call an emergency shareholder meeting and initiate a leadership review. My husband he'd been building that quietly, making the case that She stopped. That my personal instability made me a liability to the company. Your personal instability. I've been working a lot, more than usual. I've been making some decisions they don't like. I want to take the company in a direction that's less about short-term returns and more about, it doesn't matter. The specifics don't matter. The point is they had concerns, and my husband was feeding those concerns. And I found out tonight that the vote was scheduled for the board meeting in 6 days. She picked up her fork again but didn't eat. He was going to walk into that meeting and testify against me, his own wife, while living in your house. While living in my house. Yes. Her jaw tightened. While sleeping in my bed, eating my food, spending my money, and she stopped. I had no idea. That's the part I can't get past. I consider myself a perceptive person. My entire job is reading people, anticipating moves, seeing things before they happen. And I did not see this. Daniel thought about something. You saw it enough that you weren't surprised when it happened. She looked at him sharply, then the sharpness faded. That's a fair point. You weren't surprised, which means part of you knew. Part of me knew, she agreed quietly. Part of me didn't want to know. There's a difference. A big one. She was quiet for a moment. I think I kept working more because I didn't want to come home. I think I told myself it was ambition. It was easier than admitting I was avoiding my own marriage. The clock on the microwave said 1:23 a.m. Daniel looked at it and then looked at Vivian Harlow, who was sitting in her enormous kitchen eating scrambled eggs with the focused, slightly shell-shocked expression of someone who hadn't expected to be honest with anyone tonight. She had come back to herself incrementally. The mascara tracks were still there, but she'd wiped her face at some point between the balcony and the kitchen, and she was sitting upright now, both hands on the counter, not looking like someone who needed emergency services. Just like someone who'd had a very hard night and was still in it. You should sleep, he said. I can't. You should try. The board meeting is in 6 days, and my legal counsel doesn't know any of this yet, and my company's internal communications have been, I don't know how compromised they are. I don't know who else my husband has been talking to. I don't know. She stopped herself. Sorry. Don't apologize. I'm listing problems to a maintenance worker at 1 a.m. You're not doing anything wrong. He stood up and took his plate to the sink. You're working through it. That's normal. Is it? Because it doesn't feel normal. Having your husband secretly work to destroy you while you didn't know? He turned on the tap. No, that part's not normal. The working through it part is. She watched him rinse the plate with an expression he couldn't entirely read. Something between confusion and a kind of tentative steadiness, like something that had been shifting in her had started to settle. I should let you go, she said. You've been here almost 2 hours. You have work in the morning. So do you, probably. I don't know what I have. She looked at her bandaged hand. I don't know what I'm walking into in the morning. I don't even know who I can trust to answer the phone. Do you want me to call down to Frank? Have him note that you're physically okay, that there's no emergency? She thought about it. Yes, do that. She paused. And thank you for staying. Sure. I mean it. She said it plainly without the composed professional distance he'd seen in the lobby photographs. I don't know what tonight would have looked like if you just verified I was alive and left. He thought about her on that balcony, barefoot on cold stone, phone face down on her thigh, staring at a city she'd built herself over. Probably okay, he said honestly. You're not fragile. She made a sound. I'm sitting in my kitchen at 1 in the morning in a wrinkled blouse with mascara on my face and a bandage on my hand. Yeah, he said, and you still ate the eggs and explained the whole legal situation to me with perfect clarity. You're not fragile. She looked at him for a long moment. That's a very odd thing to say. It's true, though. There it was again. That small shift in her expression, the one he'd seen on the balcony. She wasn't used to people saying straightforward, true things to her without wanting something. He could see her turning it over, checking it for angles, not quite believing it was clean. He gathered his kit. Lock your door, call your lawyer in the morning, first thing, don't communicate through any channels your husband had access to. I know that. I know you know. I'm saying it anyway. He was at the foyer door when she said, Daniel? He turned. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, one hand on the frame, still barefoot, still looking like someone navigating territory she didn't have a map for. I'm not sure I'll be able to sleep. Everything is very loud up here right now. She touched her temple briefly. Up here. I know that feeling. What do you do? When your brain won't stop. He thought about the particular insomnia of bad years, the middle-of-the-night calculations about money, the replaying of arguments, the inventory of everything that had gone wrong and everything that still could. I used to drive, he said. Just drive. Nowhere in particular. Something about moving helped. She looked toward the window. 53 floors down, the city moved in its slow current. I don't actually know how to drive, she said. He stared at her. You don't know how to drive? I've had a driver since I was 25. You're 30 years old. I know how old I am. He stood in her foyer, maintenance bag in hand, and tried to figure out what to do with that piece of information. It seemed to him like a very compact summary of something much larger. A person who had moved so fast and so efficiently toward a particular version of success that she'd skipped over some things. Not out of laziness, but out of pure focus, the kind that doesn't see what's in its peripheral because it's too locked on what's ahead. Get some sleep, he said finally. First thing tomorrow, call your lawyer. You said that. I know. He opened the door. It bears repeating. He was in the private elevator, keycard in hand, when he realized he was still thinking about it. The way she'd looked on that balcony, the way she'd sat on the kitchen stool and eaten plain eggs like she was remembering something. The way she'd said, I don't know what tonight would have looked like. He pressed the lobby button. The elevator descended. Below him, somewhere in the humming machinery of the city, his daughter was asleep at his mother's apartment, one stuffed elephant tucked under her arm, entirely unbothered by the fact that her father was standing in an elevator at 1:30 in the morning, trying to figure out what had just happened to his Tuesday night. He came out into the lobby. Frank looked up from the security desk. She okay? She's okay, Daniel said. Physically. It's been a rough night. Frank nodded, not asking for more. He made a note in the log. You need anything? No. Daniel zipped his maintenance bag. I'm going to finish the 12B work order, and then I'll be in the sub-basement if you need me. He walked back to work. He fixed what needed fixing. He wrote up the log. He answered a call from Frank at 3 a.m. about a door sensor on the 14th floor and went and dealt with it. He did the job, same as any other night, but at 4:15 a.m., when he was sitting in the maintenance break room drinking bad coffee and waiting for his 6 a.m. start, he found himself thinking about a woman who didn't know how to drive, sitting in a kitchen where she didn't know what half the food was, eating scrambled eggs and asking questions she didn't have answers for. He thought about the way she'd said, "I don't know what I have," when he mentioned work in the morning. He thought about what it cost a person to build that much and hold it that tightly, and what it felt like when the hands it was resting in weren't the ones she'd thought they were. He didn't have any answers for any of it, but when his phone buzzed at 4:47 a.m. and the screen showed an unknown number with a building prefix he recognized as the penthouse line, he answered it. "I can't sleep," said Vivian Harlow's voice. She sounded more composed than she had at midnight, which meant she'd been working at it. "And I know that's not your problem. I don't have anyone I trust to call right now, and I wanted to tell someone that I think I'm going to be okay." A pause. Eventually, Daniel leaned back in his chair. Outside the small break room window, the sky was starting its long, reluctant shift from black toward gray. "Yeah," he said. "I think you probably are." She didn't say anything for a moment. "The eggs were good," she said finally. "I know." A small sound that was almost a laugh. Then, "Get some sleep if you can." "You too." She hung up. Daniel sat with his coffee going cold in his hand and the city waking up outside the window, and tried to figure out when exactly a routine wellness check had become something else entirely. He couldn't pin down the exact moment, but he had the feeling, quiet and specific, the kind he'd learned not to argue with over the years, that whatever was starting here, he was only at the very beginning of it. The call ended and Daniel set his phone face down on the break room table. He sat there for another 40 minutes, drinking bad coffee, watching the sky outside the narrow window go from gray to the particular washed-out pink that preceded a full sunrise. At 6, he clocked back in officially, finished his morning rounds, and left the building at 8:15 with the specific hollowness of someone who'd worked through the night and hadn't processed any of it. He picked up Maisie from his mother's apartment at 9. She was already dressed, which meant his mother had gotten her ready, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with a half-eaten bowl of cereal and a library book propped against the milk carton, reading with the focused intensity that she brought to everything she cared about. She looked up when he came in and immediately said, "You have the tired face." "Good morning to you too. Did you sleep at all?" "I'm fine." "That's not what I asked." His mother, Helen, appeared from the hallway with a look that said she agreed with Maisie but had decided not to say so. "There's coffee," she said instead. "I've had about 4 cups already." "Then sit down and have a 5th and eat something before you take her home." He sat. He ate toast. Maisie showed him 3 pages of her book and explained the plot in more detail than he could fully follow on no sleep, and he listened and made the right sounds, and by the time they left, he felt fractionally more human than he had at 8:50. In the truck on the way home, a 2009 Chevy that ran well enough but had developed a shimmy at highway speeds that he kept meaning to diagnose, Maisie said without looking up from her book, "Something happened last night." "Work was weird," he said. "Weird how?" "Just unusual. Nothing bad." She accepted this with the particular equanimity of a 7-year-old who had learned not to push when her father used the word nothing. She turned a page. He drove. He didn't think about Vivian Harlow specifically. He thought about the phone call at 4:47 a.m. He thought about how it had taken something real to make that call. Not distress, she'd been past distress by then, but something more deliberate. A person reaching toward another person because she'd looked around at the rest of her options and found them insufficient. He understood that particular loneliness very well. He didn't hear from her for 3 days. He worked his shifts, picked up Maisie from school, made dinner, helped with homework, went to bed at a reasonable hour, and slept the deep, simple sleep of someone who had physically worn themselves out. Life was not glamorous and had not been for some time, and he had made a kind of peace with that. Not a happy peace, exactly, but a functional one. On the 3rd day, Frank called him down to the security desk during his afternoon rounds. "Got a message for you," Frank said, sliding a folded piece of paper across the desk with an expression suggesting he found this situation both unusual and not his problem. "Left this morning. Penthouse." Daniel unfolded it. "The lawyer situation is handled. The board situation is complicated. I need some air and I don't have anyone to call who won't also have an agenda. Is that a strange reason to contact a maintenance worker? It probably is. Never mind. VH. He read it twice. Then he borrowed Frank's pen and wrote on the back, "Not strange. I get off at 4. DC. He folded it back up and left it on the desk for Frank to deal with because apparently they were doing this the old-fashioned way. At 4:12 p.m., he was standing outside the building's side entrance when she came through the lobby doors and stopped on the sidewalk. She looked different in daylight. She was wearing actual jeans, which he hadn't expected, and a dark jacket, and her hair was pulled back simply. She was also wearing sunglasses, which on any other day would have read as a celebrity-style attempt at anonymity, but today looked more like a person who hadn't been sleeping well and was sensitive to light. "Hi," she said. "Hi." They stood on the sidewalk. Around them, the mid-afternoon city went about its business with complete indifference. "I don't actually know what I want to do," she said. "I just needed to leave the building. I've been in that apartment for 3 days, and the walls are starting to—" "I have my truck," he said. "We could drive somewhere." She looked at the truck, parked at the curb, faded red, one small dent above the rear wheel well, the shimmy at highway speed situation still undiagnosed. It was, objectively, the most different possible vehicle from whatever she usually traveled in. "Okay," she said. He drove them east out of the dense tower district and through the gradual city-to-suburb transition, past the strip malls and the big-box stores, and then further where the roads widened and the traffic thinned and the buildings got lower and more spread out. He didn't explain where he was going. She sat in the passenger seat and looked out the window with a focused silence that felt less like calm and more like a person who was doing everything possible not to think about the thing they were thinking about. "How'd it go with the lawyer?" he asked. "Better than I expected." She shifted in the seat. He was angry on my behalf, which was oddly helpful. Less helpful was explaining that the board vote is still theoretically actionable even if Marcus, my husband, even if his testimony is discredited. I still need to deal with the underlying disagreement about the company's direction. "What's the disagreement about?" She glanced at him. "You want the full version?" "Abbreviated is fine." "I want to restructure the company's core business model to prioritize sustainable long-term licensing agreements over short-term acquisition deals. The board thinks I'm being idealistic. The real issue is that what I want to do is less immediately profitable, which means smaller annual bonuses for everyone at the table." She paused. Marcus framed it as emotional decision-making, which is, "That's the version that will follow me." "Is it emotional decision-making?" "No." The word came out flat and certain. "It's strategy. 15-year strategy versus 3-year strategy. They can't see past the next fiscal year." "Can you prove that?" "I can make the case very clearly. Whether they listen is a different question." She looked out the window again. A water tower appeared on the horizon, then passed behind them. "I've been doing nothing but work for 3 days. I hired a communications consultant to manage the external situation. I've been in calls with our PR team. I've been going through every internal communication I can access to figure out who Marcus was in contact with besides the 3 board members I know about." She exhaled slowly. "I found 2 more. 5 out of how many total?" 9. He did the math. "That's more than half." "Just under." Her voice was controlled but tight. "I have 4 who I'm confident are still in my corner. Maybe 4. He drove. They passed a grain elevator, a feed store, a diner with a gravel parking lot, and a hand-painted sign that said Helen's. Breakfast all day, in letters that had been faded and repainted enough times to give the sign a kind of accidental depth. "Pull in there," she said. He looked at the diner. "That place?" "I'm hungry. I've been eating those grain bowls for 3 days." He pulled in. The inside of Helen's diner was exactly what it looked like from the outside. Vinyl booths, linoleum floors, a counter with round stools, a laminated menu that had been around since approximately 2003. A woman in her 50s with a silver streak in her hair and the look of someone who had been taking no nonsense from anyone for decades appeared at their booth with 2 water glasses and a coffee pot. "Coffee?" "Please," Daniel said. Vivian looked at the pot and then at her glass and then said, "Yes, actually, yes." The woman poured and left without ceremony. Vivian looked at the menu. She turned it over and read the back. "What's good?" "I don't know. I've never been here." She looked at him. You just picked it? You said you wanted to stop. She looked back at the menu. Fine. When the waitress came back, she ordered a patty melt and a side of onion rings, both of which struck Daniel as significant departures from the nutritionist-curated grain bowl lifestyle, and he ordered a burger and coffee refill, and they sat in a booth in a diner neither of them had ever been to while the afternoon light came in sideways through the windows. I need to ask you something, Vivian said. She was wrapping her hands around the coffee mug in a way that suggested the warmth was the point. And I need you to answer honestly. Okay. The night you came up to my floor, She stopped, reorganized. When I told you about Marcus, about the board, you didn't say anything to anyone? He looked at her steadily. No. Frank? I told Frank you were physically okay and that it had been a rough night. Nothing else. Why? He thought about it. Because it wasn't mine to tell. She studied him with an expression that was still, even after several days, doing that thing, checking for the angle, looking for the catch. You could have sold it, she said. That story. Some of those finance blogs would have paid. I know, but you didn't. No. Why not? Because you were sitting on your balcony barefoot at midnight and you needed someone to not do that. He picked up his coffee. It wasn't a complicated decision. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she looked down at her coffee. Marcus used to tell me I was too trusting, she said, which is, looking back on it, that's almost funny. The person who was actively betraying me was worried I trusted people too much. Sounds like something a person says when they're trying to make you feel like the problem. Her head came up slightly. Say that again? It's easier to betray someone if they think their instincts are wrong. They've been taught to second-guess their own read of a situation. He shrugged. Made him safer. She was quiet for a long time. Outside, a truck pulled into the lot, and someone's dog in the cab barked twice at nothing. I met him at an industry event when I was 27, she said. He was working in venture capital. He understood the language, deals, leverage, long plays. I thought I'd found someone who spoke the same language I did. She turned the coffee mug in a slow circle. What I didn't account for was that knowing the language doesn't mean you're on the same side. The food came. Heaped plates. Nothing precious about any of it. Vivian looked at the patty melt like it was a specific solution to a specific problem, and then ate it with the focused efficiency of someone who had been running on nutritionist-approved food for too long. This is genuinely the best thing I've eaten in months, she said, halfway through. It's a diner in the middle of nowhere. That's why. She picked up an onion ring. Everything I eat is optimized. Everything in my life is optimized. Even this. She gestured vaguely at herself, meaning the jacket, the hair, all of it. I have a stylist who sends me clothes. I don't shop. I don't cook. I don't drive. She stopped. I outsourced so much of living that I don't actually know how to do most of it. You knew how to eat eggs the other night. That's the only thing I know. She was half joking, but only half. I know how to run a company. I know how to negotiate a contract. I know how to read a room full of people who want something from me and figure out what they actually need. She set down the onion ring. I don't know how to exist when I'm not working. What do you do when you're not working? She looked at him blankly. Right now, he said. When you have time off. I don't, usually. But when you do. A pause. I read industry reports. She heard herself say it. Or I go to events, charity things, client dinners. She was quiet for a moment. Marcus and I used to travel the first 2 years, but then he said the trips stressed him out, the scheduling, so we stopped. She paused again. I think he just didn't want to be somewhere he couldn't control what I was doing. Daniel said nothing. He ate his burger. Outside the window, the afternoon was going long and golden, and a kid on a bicycle crossed the gravel lot and disappeared around the side of the building. My ex-wife, he said after a while, used to tell me I was too attached to a version of the future that wasn't realistic, that I kept making plans that weren't going to work out and dragging her along with them. He kept his voice level. I spent a long time after she left trying to figure out if she was right, whether I was actually bad at planning, or whether she just needed someone to blame when she wanted to leave. Vivian looked at him carefully. It took about 2 years to figure out that it was both, he said. I was bad at some things. She also needed someone to blame. Both were true, and neither of them was the whole story. He looked at his coffee. The hard part was separating them. Because if you accept all of it as your fault, you at least get to feel like you understand what happened. It's when you start taking out the parts that were actually someone else's fault that it gets complicated. Because then you have to acknowledge you couldn't have seen it. And that it wasn't preventable. Yeah. Vivian put down her coffee mug. I keep replaying conversations, she said, looking for the moments I should have known, the signs I missed. Find any? Dozens. Her voice tightened briefly. In retrospect, they're everywhere. But in the moment they all looked like normal relationship friction. Small resentments, the usual complaints. You don't know which ones are the ordinary wear and which ones are the... She stopped. The fault lines. No, he agreed. You don't. They paid the bill. She put her card down before he could reach for his wallet, and he let it go because it didn't seem like the moment to argue, and walked out into the cooling evening air. The drive back was quieter than the drive out, but differently quiet. Less like a person avoiding a thought, and more like a person who has said the hard thing out loud and is now just sitting with the fact that they said it. The truck shimmied slightly on the on-ramp. What's that? She said. Shimmy at highway speeds. I haven't had time to look at it. Is it dangerous? No, just annoying. She looked at the dashboard, the worn cup holder, the charging cable coiled below the stereo. How long have you had this truck? 6 years. Is it reliable? Mostly. He merged into traffic. It had a rough patch 2 years ago. New alternator, new brakes. We came out the other side. She was quiet for a moment. We? He glanced at her. Me and the truck. Something crossed her face. He caught it in his peripheral vision, something between amusement and something more complicated. She turned back to the window. They were back in the city proper when she said, I've been thinking about what you said, the night in my kitchen, about not having to figure it out that night. Yeah? I've been trying to do that. Just deal with one thing at a time. Lawyer, communications, security protocols, not the whole picture all at once. She paused. It goes against every instinct I have. I'm a big picture person. I build systems. I think 15 steps ahead. Being told to just look at the next step feels incomplete. It is incomplete, he said. That's the point. Meaning what? Meaning you don't have the full picture yet. You've got 5 board members working against you, a PR situation, and a husband who just walked out. You don't know how all of that lands yet. Making big decisions now, before you know, is just guessing in a direction. She thought about this. That's actually sound strategy. It's not strategy, it's just not panicking. Sometimes those are the same thing. He pulled up in front of Harlow Tower. The evening doorman was on, different from the overnight staff. A young man named Jesse, who nodded at Daniel with the brief professional acknowledgement of someone who didn't ask questions. Vivian didn't get out immediately. She sat looking at the building's lobby through the windshield, the marble foyer, the lit-up tower beyond it, the whole monument to what she'd built. I'm going to fight the board vote, she said. I've been going back and forth, but I'm going to fight it. Yeah? I haven't done anything wrong. I'm not going to act like I have. He nodded. And I need to go through the full communications audit tonight. 3 more key people I haven't contacted yet. Okay. She opened the door. Then she stopped, half in and half out of the truck, and turned back to look at him with an expression he was starting to recognize, the one that appeared when she was about to say something honest. You're easy to talk to, she said. I've been trying to figure out why, and I think it's because you're not gaining anything from any of this. There's nothing here for you. You're just present. He didn't have a good answer for that. Thank you for the drive, she said. And the diner. The diner was your idea. The truck was yours. She almost smiled. I'll take credit where I can get it. She got out. He watched her walk into the lobby. Not the striding, purposeful walk of the CEO in the building photographs, but something more deliberate, like a person carrying weight and choosing where to put their feet. Jessie held the door. The glass closed behind her. Daniel sat in the parked truck for a moment. His phone said 6:44 p.m. Maisie would be at after-school care for another 20 minutes. He had time to get there without rushing. He pulled out into traffic. He drove past the point where the towers thinned and the buildings went human scale again, past a school he recognized, past the pharmacy where he got Maisie's allergy prescription, past the intersection where the Chinese place they ordered from on Fridays was located. The ordinary geography of his life, unchanged. He thought about what she'd said. "There's nothing here for you." He turned it over. The true version of it was more complicated. He wasn't gaining anything from being in that diner. That much was accurate. But nothing here. That was wrong. Not wrong in the way that required saying anything out loud. Not wrong in any way that was particularly actionable at this moment, but wrong in the quiet, factual sense of a thing that is simply not accurate. Something had already started. He didn't know what shape it was going to take. He didn't know whether it was a good idea. He'd spent enough of his adult life making decisions based on whether they were good ideas to know that the feeling underneath a decision and the wisdom of a decision were two different measurements, and they didn't always agree. He picked Maisie up from after-school care, and she showed him a drawing she'd made of their apartment building with their windows lit up yellow and a very small version of the red truck parked in front. He told her it was perfect. She said she knew. They went home. He made pasta, helped with 1 page of reading homework, lost a card game to a 7-year-old with no mercy, and sat on the edge of her bed while she fell asleep with her library book still open beside her. He closed the book, set it on the nightstand. Outside the window, the city did its thing. He watched it for a while. He thought about a woman who didn't know how to drive, sitting in a truck with a shimmy, eating a patty melt in a diner she'd never been to, saying, "This is the best thing I've eaten in months," and meaning it in a way that had nothing to do with the food. He went to bed. He didn't call her. She didn't call him. But at 11:03 p.m., his phone lit up with a text from a number that was saved now, just as a building prefix and 2 initials, "Audit done. 4 confirmed, 2 uncertain, 3 against. Better odds than I thought. Going to try to sleep." He read it once, then he typed back, "Good. Sleep." A minute passed. The patty melt was better than the grain bowl. He set the phone on the nightstand. He was smiling when he fell asleep, and he didn't particularly try to stop. The board meeting was in 3 days when Vivian called him at 7 in the morning. Daniel was in the middle of making Maisie's lunch, peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, the small bag of pretzels she liked, and he answered with the phone wedged between his ear and shoulder while he pressed the sandwich halves together. "They leaked it," Vivian said. Her voice was controlled in the specific way of someone who had been awake since very early, managing their own reaction to something. Someone on the board, or someone adjacent, gave it to a financial news outlet. The headline is that Harlow Innovations is facing an internal leadership crisis. They used the word instability. They quoted an unnamed source describing my behavior over the past few weeks as erratic. Daniel set down the sandwich. "When did it go up?" 6:14 this morning. My communications director called me at 6:20. It's already been picked up by 2 other outlets. A pause. "The stock opened down 4%. What does your lawyer say?" "He says we can't prove who leaked it, and going after the source publicly would look defensive. He wants me to get ahead of it with a statement." Another pause. Tighter. "The statement his team drafted says I'm committed to the company's future and that the board and I are in productive dialogue about strategic direction." Her voice flattened. "It reads like I'm already managing my own exit. Are you going to use it?" "No." The word came out clean and certain. "I'm not issuing a statement that sounds like I'm apologizing for something I didn't do." Maisie appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas, squinting at the morning light. Daniel held up 1 finger. She made a face and shuffled to the table. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I want to go into that board meeting in 3 days and make the case myself. No intermediaries, no PR language, no managed optics. Just the actual argument." She breathed out. "My communications director thinks that's a terrible idea." "What do you think?" A brief silence. "I think it's the only idea I can live with." He thought about it for a second. "Then do that." "It might not work." "I know. If it doesn't work, I lose the company." "I know that too." She was quiet on the other end. Outside his apartment window, the street was doing its morning things. Garbage truck 3 blocks over, a car alarm that someone silenced after 4 seconds, a neighbor's radio through the wall. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I want you to answer honestly, not just helpfully. Those aren't always different." With you, they sometimes are. There was something almost wry in it. You're easy to talk to, and I don't want that to make me mistake what you're actually telling me for what I want to hear. He put Maisie's lunch bag in her backpack and pulled her cereal down from the cabinet. Ask, do you think I'm making the right call? Fighting this? Or is this my ego? Is this just me refusing to accept that I might have actually lost? He didn't answer immediately, which he thought was probably the right instinct. Maisie poured her own cereal, spilled some, swept it to the floor with her hand in a way that she thought he didn't see. He pointed at the small broom by the refrigerator. She made another face and got up. I think, he said carefully, that ego and being right aren't mutually exclusive. I think you probably are refusing to accept that you might lose, and I think you might also genuinely be right. He moved to the coffee maker. The question isn't whether it's ego. The question is whether you can afford to act like it isn't. Another silence, longer this time. That's not comforting, she said. You asked for honest. I did. He could hear her exhaling slowly. Okay. I'm going to work on the presentation. I have 3 days. 3 days is enough time. You don't know what the presentation needs to cover. No, but I know you built a company from a licensing deal at 23. 3 days is enough time. She made a sound, not the almost laugh from the first night, something steadier. I'll call you later. I'll be here. He hung up and stood in his kitchen with cold coffee, watching Maisie sweep pretzel crumbs off the floor with the focused moral discomfort of someone who knew she'd been caught. She sounds serious, Maisie said without looking up. She's got a lot going on. Is she your friend? He thought about it for half a second too long because Maisie looked up with 7-year-old radar that missed nothing. Something like that, he said. Come on, shoes, you're going to be late. She went to get her shoes, but she was smiling at the floor in a way she probably thought he didn't see. He did. Over the next 2 days, he saw her twice. The first time was brief. She came down to the lobby in the evening, laptop bag over her shoulder, and said she needed coffee that wasn't from her unit, and could he show her where the nearest non-optimized coffee place was. He took her to a place 3 blocks east that had mismatched chairs and a bulletin board thick with flyers, and she spent 40 minutes there while he read work notices on his phone, and she reworked sections of a financial projection on her laptop, occasionally reading sentences out loud to no one in particular, which he eventually figured was her way of listening to how her own argument sounded. That sentence is too long, he said once, without looking up from his phone. She backspaced and tried again. Better? Yeah. She didn't comment on the fact that he'd said so. She just moved on. The second time was longer. She appeared at the building's side entrance just before noon on the day before the board meeting, and she looked like someone who had been working and sleeping in approximately equal, insufficient amounts for 48 hours. She had the laptop bag again, and what looked like a printed document under one arm, and a cup of coffee she was holding in the manner of someone clinging to a structural support. I need a different room, she said. I need somewhere that isn't that apartment. The walls thing is happening again. The shimmy thing is still happening in the truck, he said. Fair warning. I don't care. He drove them back out to that part of the city where the streets widened and the traffic thinned. Not to the diner this time. They ended up at a public park that Daniel knew because Maisie's school did a spring field day there. A plain, flat expanse of grass with a few picnic tables near a dried-up fountain that had been out of service for at least 2 years. It was cold enough that they were the only people at the tables. She spread her documents out and worked. He sat across from her and did nothing in particular, which was something he'd gotten good at during Maisie's homework hours, being present without being in the way. After about 20 minutes, she put her pen down and looked at the fountain. I built this company because I wanted to prove something, she said. To my parents, partly. To myself. To every person who looked at my loan applications at 23 and made a certain face. She picked up the pen again and turned it in her fingers. At some point, the proving thing stopped being the reason, and the company became the reason. Like, the whole point became protecting the thing I'd built, instead of building it for a reason. Daniel didn't say anything. Marcus understood that, she continued. He understood it, and he used it. Because I was so focused on protecting the company that I stopped questioning who else was in the building. Metaphorically. Did you love him? Daniel asked. He hadn't planned to, it just landed. She looked at him, and for a moment he thought she was going to redirect. Instead, she thought about it with visible seriousness, like someone doing an honest inventory. I think I loved what he represented when I met him, she said finally. Someone who understood the work, who wasn't going to ask me to be less ambitious, who was… She stopped. I think I was more in love with not being alone in it than I was with him specifically. And I think he knew that. I think that was useful information to him. That's a hard thing to admit. It's been a hard week. She looked back at her papers. I keep thinking, what does it say about me that I built all of this and the personal side of my life was just hollow, empty? I was so good at one thing and completely catastrophic at the other. But you weren't catastrophic, he said. You got played by someone with a long game and a lot of access. That's different. Is it, though? Shouldn't I have… He lived in your house. He had 4 years of daily proximity and a specific agenda. That's not a personal failing, Vivian. That's just… Sometimes people are patient in terrible ways. She looked at him for a moment with that expression again, the one checking for the angle. Then she seemed to decide there wasn't one. You do that, she said. Do what? Use my name when you're saying something you want me to actually hear. He hadn't noticed he did that. Does it work? She looked back at her papers. Unfortunately, yes. She worked for another hour. He went and got sandwiches from a gas station 2 blocks from the park, the kind that came in plastic triangles and were objectively fine, and she ate half of one without looking up from what she was writing. He ate his entire one without comment because he'd been eating gas station sandwiches for 3 years and had made peace with them. At some point, she put her pen down and said, "Tell me something about Maisie." The shift was sudden enough that he looked up. Why? Because I've been thinking about leverage and board votes and financial projections for 36 hours, and I need to think about something else for 3 minutes. He considered. She beat me at cards last night, badly. She had absolutely no mercy. A real smile. What game? Go fish, which shouldn't require strategy, but apparently she's found one. How? I have no idea. She won't tell me. She says it's proprietary. Vivian laughed. An actual unguarded laugh, short and genuine. She sounds like someone who's going to be very difficult to negotiate with in about 10 years. She's already difficult to negotiate with now. I just have the size advantage. Is she like you? He thought about it. She's better than me, more focused, more sure of what she wants. When she was 5, she decided she wanted to be a marine biologist, and she has not deviated from that position 1 degree. He looked at the dried-up fountain. I was that age before I decided anything, and I've been second-guessing it ever since. She sounds certain in a way that most adults aren't. She is, He paused. Her mom leaving hit her hard, though. Not immediately. She was too little to understand immediately. But around 5, 6, when her friends had 2 parents and she started noticing. She went quiet for a while. He said this matter-of-factly, but felt the weight of it anyway. The way he always did. She came out of it. They're more resilient than you think, but it leaves a mark anyway. Vivian was quiet for a moment. Do you talk to her about it? When she asks less than she used to. He picked up the remains of his sandwich. She asked me once if her mom left because of something she did. She was 6. He paused. That was a hard conversation. What did you say? I said no. I said it clearly, and I said it more than once, and I said it in every different way I could think of until I was sure she'd heard it. He looked at his hands. I don't know if it landed completely. That might be a thing she has to keep working out as she gets older, but I wanted her to at least start with the right information. Vivian was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen before, quieter than usual, less armored. She's lucky, she said, to have someone who shows up like that. She's my kid. I know, but that's not automatic. Showing up the way you describe. That's a choice. He didn't have a response to that. He looked at the fountain. She looked at her papers. Okay, she said after a while. I need to get back. They drove back in the late afternoon, the truck's shimmy announcing itself on the on-ramp with the reliability of something deeply known. She didn't comment on it this time. She was looking at her document in her lap, making a small note in the margin, and when he glanced over, she had the focused look of someone who had made a decision and was moving toward it without looking back. He dropped her at the side entrance. "Tomorrow," she said, getting out. "Yeah." She looked at him through the open door. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me a real answer, not a reassuring one." "I'll try." "If it doesn't go well tomorrow, if the vote goes through, if they call the shareholder meeting, what does a person do with that?" He thought about the specific shape of that question. Not will it work, but what do you do when it doesn't? He recognized it. He'd asked himself a version of it sitting in a parking garage 4 years ago after signing divorce papers, with Maisie asleep in her car seat behind him, trying to figure out what the next correct move was in a situation where there wasn't a good one. "You do the next thing," he said. "Not the whole picture. Just the next thing." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once, shut the door, and walked into the building. He drove home. "What?" She called him at 9:47 p.m. "I finished the presentation," she said. She sounded tired, but not frayed. "It's good. I think it's actually good." "Yeah?" "Yeah." A pause. "I've been sitting here trying to find the weak points and I can't find them, which either means it's genuinely solid or I'm too close to it to see the gaps. Is there anyone who could look at it tonight? Someone you trust?" "My CFO. She's been in my corner since the beginning." A brief pause. "I'll send it to her." "Good." He was in bed, which meant the room was quiet, which meant he could hear the quality of the silence on her end. The big apartment silence. The city above the city silence of a place designed for one particular version of a life. "I keep thinking about what I said at the park," she said. "About building the company as a thing in itself instead of a means to something. I keep thinking, if I win tomorrow and I keep the company, does anything change? Or do I just go back to the same 70-hour weeks and the optimized food and the stylist-selected clothes and the—" She stopped. "The wall's getting smaller." "That's probably the question worth answering," he said. "I know. I'm not ready to answer it yet." A pause. "But I know it's the question." He shifted in bed. "How are you feeling? Not about the meeting. Just, how are you?" A beat of quiet that meant she was checking. "Scared," she said. "Which I think is actually healthy. I think I've been not scared for a long time by not feeling things I should have been feeling." She paused. "So scared is probably progress." "Probably." "That's a terrible thing to be reassured by." "I know." A short sound. The real almost laugh. He'd gotten good at distinguishing them. "Get some sleep," he said. "I will." She paused. "Daniel." "Yeah. Whatever happens tomorrow, I need you to know that these last few days have been—" She stopped, started again. "I've had 3 people call me this week to tell me they were sorry about what was happening, and they were all being genuine, and somehow every single one of those conversations made me feel worse." She paused. "This doesn't. Talking to you doesn't. I don't fully understand why, but I wanted to say it out loud." He lay in the dark and held the phone and didn't immediately say anything because some things deserved a second before you responded. "Get some sleep, Vivian," he said finally. "Make your case tomorrow." "I will." She hung up. He put the phone on the nightstand. In the next room, Maisie's nightlight was on, a small yellow shape that threw a thin line of light under her door. He could hear her breathing through the baby monitor he still kept on, even though she was 7 and had told him twice she was too old for it. He lay there and thought about the board meeting tomorrow. He thought about a woman who'd built something from nothing, standing in a room full of people who wanted to take it from her, making her case out loud without intermediaries or managed optics. He hoped she was as good at it as he thought she was. He was fairly sure she was. He was on the 14th floor checking the door sensor he'd repaired 3 nights ago when his phone buzzed at 2:23 p.m. the next day. A single text from the number with the building prefix and 2 initials. They voted to proceed with the shareholder meeting, 4 to 5. I lost by 1. He stood in the hallway and read it twice. Then, "I'm okay. Don't come up. I just needed to tell someone." He typed back, "I know. I'm here." He finished checking the sensor. He wrote up the log. He went back to work. But at 3:15, when he was passing through the lobby on his way to the stairwell, Frank looked up from the security desk. "Penthouse called down," Frank said. "Asked if you were in the building." Daniel stopped. Frank shrugged with the expression of a man who had decided this was entirely not his business. "I told her you were." Daniel put his hand on the elevator call button. He went up. She opened the door before he knocked. She was still in the clothes she'd worn to the meeting, a structured gray blazer, dark trousers, the whole assembled armor of a person who had walked into a difficult room prepared, and she looked like someone who had held herself together through something very difficult and was now in the immediate aftermath of having done that. Not crying, not in the collapsed way of the first night, just still, like a person who has just set down something very heavy and hasn't yet decided whether to pick it back up. "I held 4, she said. "The 4 I was sure of held. It was the 2 uncertains. They both voted against me." "I'm sorry." The presentation was good. She said it without vanity, just as a fact. "My CFO said so." It didn't matter. They'd already decided. She moved back into the apartment and he followed, and she sat on the couch. Not the armored sitting of someone maintaining composure, just sitting, like her body needed to stop being held upright for a minute. Someone had gotten to them before the meeting. Someone had been very persuasive. "Marcus?" "I think so. Probably through a lawyer, something that gives him distance." She looked at the window. The sky outside was the pale, washed-out gray of an afternoon that had never quite decided to be sunny. "The shareholder meeting is in 30 days. They'll use that meeting to initiate a formal leadership review. If it goes the way they're planning, there'll be a vote of no confidence." She paused. "I have 30 days to turn 2 votes. Can you?" "I don't know." She looked at her hands. "Maybe, if I can find what Marcus's lawyer promised them, if I can make the case directly." She was quiet for a moment. "Or I could let it go." He didn't respond immediately. "I keep thinking about what I said yesterday," she continued. "About whether anything changes if I win, whether I just go back to the same—" She stopped. "I've been running on a particular kind of energy for a long time. Fear adjacent. Not quite fear, but something in the same family. The fear of losing the thing I built. And I don't know if that's still—" She looked at him. "I don't know if that's still the right fuel." "What would the right fuel be?" She looked at him for a long time. The apartment was very quiet. "I don't know yet," she said, "but I think that's actually the first honest thing I've said about the company in years." He sat with that. She looked at the gray window. "I made a decision in the car on the way back," she said. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the weight underneath it, the particular weight of something that has been decided but hasn't yet been said out loud enough to become fully real. "I haven't told anyone yet. I'm not entirely sure it's right." She paused. "But I'm sure it's honest." He waited. "I'm going to resign," she said, "before the shareholder meeting. On my own terms, not theirs." She breathed out slowly. "I'm going to stand in front of that board, and I'm going to hand them the company, and I'm going to walk out while it's still my choice." The room held the silence of something just said that couldn't be unsaid. "Are you sure?" he asked. "No." She looked at him directly. "But I think I will be." She didn't resign that week. Not because she changed her mind. The decision had settled in her in the quiet, immovable way that real decisions do. The kind that doesn't require constant revisiting because it's already finished, but because her lawyer told her the timing mattered. Walking out before the shareholder meeting, done wrong, could look like panic. Done right, it could look like exactly what it was. A person choosing their own terms over someone else's timeline. The difference between those two things was in the execution, and execution required preparation. So she prepared. Daniel watched it happen from the particular vantage point of someone who was adjacent to a situation without being inside it. She called him most evenings, sometimes briefly, sometimes for an hour. She talked through the legal structure of her exit, how to separate her personal holdings from the company assets, how to manage the communication to staff, what to say publicly and what to say internally, and whether those two things needed to be different. He didn't understand all of it. He understood enough. Mostly he listened, and occasionally he asked the kind of question that wasn't strategic but was true. And occasionally that was what she needed more than strategy. On a Wednesday, 11 days after the board vote, She called him at 6:15 in the evening while he was in the middle of the school pickup line. "I need to tell my CFO today," she said, "before anyone else. She deserves to hear it from me directly." "What are you worried about?" "That she'll try to talk me out of it. She's loyal. She's going to see this as giving up, and she's wrong, but I'm not sure I can explain that in a way she'll accept." The line moved. Daniel eased the truck forward. 2 cars ahead, a minivan had its door open and a kid was taking too long with a backpack. "What's the truest way to say it?" he asked. "What?" "The thing you'd say to her if you weren't worried about her reaction. The actual reason." Vivian was quiet for a moment. "That I've been running on the wrong fuel for a long time, and I think I knew it for longer than I admitted, and I don't want to spend the next decade running harder on something that was already empty." A pause. "That winning this fight, even if I could win it, would cost me something I haven't fully named yet, but I can feel the shape of, and that the cost is too high." Tell her that. She'll say it's not rational. Maybe, but it's true. Another pause. In the line, the minivan finally closed its door and moved. "You make things very simple," she said. It wasn't a complaint exactly. Not simple, just direct. Maisie appeared at the truck's passenger door, backpack bouncing, and climbed in with the energy of someone who had been sitting still all day and was done with it. "I have to go," he said. "Pick up." "Right. Okay." He could hear her steadying herself. "Okay, I'll call her now." She hung up. Maisie buckled her seatbelt and immediately launched into a detailed report about a disagreement at lunch that had apparently involved someone's sandwich and a significant breach of social contract. And Daniel drove and listened and made the right sounds, and by the time they got home, the Vivian conversation had moved to the back of his mind, where it sat quietly and waited. She texted him at 9:30 that night, told her, she cried. I almost cried. "We spent 2 hours going over the transition plan. She's going to be fine. I think I'm going to be fine." He typed back, "I know." A minute later, "You always say that, because it keeps being true." A longer pause this time. "Daniel, yeah, I think I want you to meet Maisie." He sat with his phone in his hand for a moment. "She might not like me," Vivian sent. "That's a real possibility. I want you to know I've considered it." He was smiling before he could decide not to be. "She'll like you," he typed. "She has good instincts. Better than yours? Much better than mine." He thought about it more carefully over the next 2 days than he let on to either of them. It wasn't that he was uncertain about what was happening between him and Vivian. He was past the point of pretending that what had started as a wellness check had stayed a wellness check. Something had shifted somewhere in the diner or the park or the 47 phone calls between 11 p.m. and midnight. Something that he'd been trying not to examine too closely because examining it required deciding what to do about it, and he wasn't ready to do that. But Maisie was different. Maisie was not a thing he could navigate carefully and course-correct if it went wrong. Maisie was 7 years old and still occasionally quiet in the way she'd been quiet at 6 when she was working something hard out about the world. And she had already had one person who was supposed to be permanent turn out to be temporary. And Daniel had learned to be careful about what he introduced into her orbit. The other side of it was this. Maisie had already asked twice about the woman on the phone, and his daughter had very good instincts, as advertised. He picked a Saturday. Neutral territory. Not the apartment, which was too small and too much Maisie's domain, and not the penthouse, which was too much everything else. He suggested the park where he and Vivian had worked at the picnic table because he knew it and it was open and low stakes. He told Maisie the night before. He kept it simple. His friend was going to meet them at the park tomorrow, someone he'd been talking to lately, and her name was Vivian. Maisie considered this with her head tilted slightly to one side, which was her thinking posture. "The phone lady?" she said. "Yeah." "Does she like marine biology?" "I don't know. You could ask her." Maisie thought about it some more. "Okay," she said finally, with the decisive simplicity of someone who had made an assessment and rendered a verdict. Then she went back to her book. He didn't sleep especially well. Vivian showed up at the park in jeans and a dark green pullover, no laptop bag, no documents, hands in her pockets. She looked less like herself than he'd seen her, or maybe more like herself. It was getting harder to know which was which. and she spotted him from 20 yards out and lifted one hand in a small wave. And when she got closer, she looked at Maisie with the focused, slightly uncertain expression of someone who understood they were being evaluated. Maisie was on the swing, pumping her legs, watching the approach with the full attention of someone conducting an assessment. "This is Maisie," Daniel said. "Maisie, this is Vivian." Vivian stopped in front of the swing. "Hi." "Hi," Maisie said. She didn't stop swinging. "My dad said you have a lot going on." "He's right," Vivian said. "I do." "Is it stressful?" "Yes." "My dad says stress is what happens when you care about something, but you can't control it." Vivian glanced at Daniel. "Did he say that?" "Something like that," Daniel said. Maisie brought the swing to a stop by dragging her feet. She looked at Vivian with frank, direct attention. "Do you know about marine biology?" "Not much," Vivian said honestly. "I know the ocean is larger than most people account for in their daily planning." Maisie stared at her. "That's a weird thing to say." "Probably. I like it, though." Maisie got off the swing. "I'm doing a project on bioluminescent animals. Do you know what bioluminescent means?" "It means they produce their own light." Maisie's expression shifted, the particular shift of someone who has just recalibrated. "Most adults say they don't know." "I had to read a lot of scientific reports for work," Vivian said. "Some of them were marine adjacent." "Marine adjacent?" Maisie repeated, with the tone of someone adding a phrase to their vocabulary. She looked at her father. "I like her." Daniel looked at the sky briefly. Maisie took off toward the play structure, apparently having completed her intake process and moved on. Vivian watched her go and then exhaled slowly. "That was terrifying," she said quietly enough that Maisie wouldn't hear. "You did fine." "She's extremely direct. She gets it from somewhere." Vivian looked at him. "Are you implying she gets it from me? We just met." "I'm implying she gets it from someone she hasn't met yet, who she might have things in common with." She turned back to watch Maisie scale the play structure with the particular fearlessness of children who haven't yet learned to be afraid of heights. "She's not what I expected," she said. "She's very—" She searched for the word. "Certain. There's a certainty about her that I didn't have at that age." "What were you like at 7? "Quiet. Watching everything, trying to figure out the rules so I could follow them exactly." She paused. "She doesn't look like she's following anyone's rules." "She's not," he said. "She's generally writing her own." They walked the loop of the park slowly, the way you walk when you're not going anywhere, while Maisie moved between the play structure and the open grass with the inexhaustible energy of someone for whom Saturday existed as a pure concept of motion. "The formal resignation is next Thursday," Vivian said, after they'd been walking for a while. She said it without particular drama, like reading a date off a calendar. "There's a board meeting scheduled for operational matters, and I asked to be added to the agenda." She paused. "My lawyer drew up the paperwork. My CFO knows. Beyond that, no one." "How are you feeling about it?" "Strange?" She thought about it. "Not bad strange, just, I've been this person for 7 years. The CEO, the founder. Even before I had the title, I was building toward it. And now I'm—" She stopped. "I don't know what comes next. I have a financial structure that means I'm not going to struggle, practically. But I don't know what I'm for outside of this company. And that's—" She paused. "That's a bigger question than I've been letting myself look at." "You mentioned the workshop thing," he said. "Teaching." She glanced at him. "I mentioned that once." "You mentioned it at the diner. You said the case you were making to the board was about sustainable long-term development versus short-term returns, and you said they couldn't see past the next fiscal year." He shrugged. "There are a lot of people building things who have the same problem and don't have anyone around them who knows the difference." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very different life from the one I've been living." "Yeah. A community center workshop is, She stopped. "I'm not being dismissive, the scale is different." "The scale being smaller doesn't make it matter less." She looked at him. "That sounds like something you've had to work out for yourself." "Everything I know sounds like that." She turned back to the path. Maisie had found a stick somewhere and was using it to investigate something in the grass near the dried-up fountain, fully absorbed, narrating quietly to herself in the way she did when she thought no one was listening. "What was the hardest part?" Vivian asked. "After your wife left. The practical hardest part." "Money," he said immediately. There was no question. It was money. I was on one income with a 3-year-old, and the apartment rent had assumed 2. I spent about 6 months doing the math differently every week trying to find a version that worked. Did you find one? Eventually, picked up extra shifts, moved to a smaller unit. My mom helped with childcare so I didn't have to pay full daycare rates. He paused. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Were you scared? Every day for about a year. He said it plainly. Then less. Then just some days. She nodded slowly, and he could see her applying this to her own situation in the specific way she had of taking information and running it against her own experience to see what fit. "The penthouse is in the company's name," she said. "It's listed as a corporate residence. I'll need to vacate it as part of the transition." He looked at her. "Where will you go?" "I've been looking at apartments." She said it with the careful casualness of someone trying not to make something sound bigger than it is. "Normal ones. Not the Tower District. Something smaller." "You've been apartment hunting?" "I've been looking online at apartment hunting," she corrected. "I haven't actually done it. I don't know how." She said this with complete seriousness, the way she'd said she didn't know how to drive. Not ashamed of it, just accurate. "I know how to negotiate a commercial real estate deal. I have no idea how to fill out a rental application." He almost laughed. "It's not that different." "You say that. I have a feeling the landlord of a normal apartment building is going to look at my employment history and have a lot of questions." Former CEO of a billion-dollar company is probably solid on the creditworthiness front. Former CEO of a billion-dollar company who just voluntarily resigned is a different sentence. He thought about it. "I can help you look," he said. "If you want." She glanced at him quickly. "You don't have to. I know I don't have to." He kept his voice easy. "I've been renting in this city for 8 years. I know the neighborhoods. I know which landlords are responsive and which ones take 3 weeks to fix a heater." She looked at him for a moment with that expression, the one checking for the angle, the one she still sometimes used even now, even after weeks of conversations that had been nothing but clean. He'd stopped finding it annoying. He understood it. It was what happened when you'd been close to someone who had a very long, very patient game, and your instincts had recalibrated accordingly. "Okay," she said. "Thank you." Maisie appeared from the direction of the fountain, holding the stick, with a look on her face that meant she had discovered something. "There's a frog," she said. "A real one, by the fountain drain." "In October," Daniel said. "I know, he's very confused." She looked at Vivian. "Do you want to see a confused frog?" Vivian looked at Daniel, then back at Maisie. "Yes," she said. "Actually, yes." Maisie led them back to the fountain with the authority of a guide who knew the terrain. The frog was real. A small gray-brown thing sitting in the shaded crack beside the fountain's drain, entirely still, looking like it had made a series of increasingly poor decisions. Maisie crouched and looked at it with complete focus. "He probably got separated from his habitat," she said. "Urban parks have fragmented ecosystems. That's from my research." "That's accurate," Vivian said, also crouching. She studied the frog with genuine attention. "He looks healthy, though. Just disoriented." "That's what I think," Maisie said. "Disoriented is different from in danger." She stood up, apparently satisfied with this assessment, and moved on to the next thing. Vivian stayed crouched by the fountain drain for another second. Then she stood, slowly, and looked at Daniel with an expression he didn't have a word for. Something that had been worked out in the last few minutes, something that had arrived quietly without announcing itself. "Disoriented is different from in danger," she said. "Yeah." "She's going to be fine," Vivian said. "Your daughter, the certainty she has, it's not blind, it's not naive. She's paying attention to everything. She's just not afraid of what she sees." "I know," Daniel said. "That took work. That kind of confidence in a kid. That didn't just happen." He looked across the park to where Maisie was already on to the next discovery, stick in hand, entirely in her own world. 4 years, he said. Some days it was just say the right thing, make the right call, show up again tomorrow. Not elegant. But it worked, Vivian said. Like she was saying it back to him deliberately, the way he'd said it to her. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. He looked at her. She was looking at Maisie still, but there was a quality to her stillness that was different from the controlled stillness of the first nights. Fuller, somehow, less like a held breath and more like an exhale. Come on, he said. She's going to find something else to show us. They walked. What? Thursday came with a flat gray sky and the particular quiet of a morning that knows something is about to happen. Daniel was on the 7th floor when his phone buzzed at 10:33 a.m. He looked at the screen, a text from Vivian. Going in now. He typed back. I know. He didn't hear from her for 2 hours and 40 minutes. At 1:17 p.m., his phone buzzed again. It's done. He stood in the 7th floor hallway with his maintenance bag in his hand and read those 2 words. Then, I handed them the letter. I said what I wanted to say. I walked out. A pause between texts, enough time that he could feel the weight of what was being assembled on the other end. My CFO walked out with me. She resigned on the spot. I told her not to, and she told me to be quiet. He smiled at that. I'm in my car. My driver is very carefully not looking at me in the rearview mirror. I don't know where I'm going. He typed. I get off at 4. Okay, she sent. There's a place 2 blocks from the building. Blue awning. Good coffee. Real coffee, not optimized. I'll be there at 4. He put the phone in his pocket and stood in the 7th floor hallway for a moment, feeling the specific quality of a day that has just changed shape. Then he went back to work, because the work was still there and still needed doing, and that was a thing that had not changed and would not change. And somewhere in the reliability of that was something he had learned to find steadying rather than small. At 4:15, Vivian Harlow was sitting at a corner table in the place with the blue awning, both hands around a coffee mug, looking out the window at the ordinary street traffic. She wasn't wearing the gray blazer. She wasn't wearing any of the assembled armor. She was in a dark sweater and her hair was down, and she looked like someone who had just set down something very heavy and was still figuring out what her hands did without it. She looked up when he came in. Hi, she said. Hi. He ordered a coffee and sat across from her. How are you? She considered this with the seriousness she brought to honest questions. I don't know yet, she said, but I think that's okay. He looked at her. She looked back. Outside the window, the gray afternoon went on doing what it was doing, indifferent and ongoing, the city moving in its usual current. They were surprised, she said, when I walked in. I think they expected me to fight the shareholder meeting. I think they had a whole plan for how that was going to go. She wrapped her hands tighter around the mug, handing them the letter when they expected a battle. You could see it land. The chairman actually asked me if I was sure. She paused. 3 times. What did you say? I said yes. And then I said what I wanted to say about the company, about what I built and what it was supposed to be for, before it became just a thing to protect. And then I thanked the people who had been honest with me, and I walked out. She looked at her coffee. I said it clearly. I didn't rush it. It was the first time in weeks I felt like I was speaking in my own voice. He didn't say anything. He drank his coffee. Marcus called while I was in the car, she said. I didn't answer. Good. My lawyer will handle whatever comes next on that front. She paused. His leverage disappears the moment I'm no longer CEO. There's nothing left for him to use. I took the whole structure away. Smart. It was the only smart thing about letting it get this far. She said it without self-pity, just as in accounting. But I'll take one smart thing at the end. She looked out the window again. The light outside was going that particular late afternoon angle that turned everything slightly gold, even gray cities, even ordinary streets. I looked at an apartment online last night, she said. On the east side, 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, a kitchen with a window. She paused. It's not optimized. There's a chip in the countertop in one of the listing photos. Chipped countertops build character. That's what I told myself. She almost smiled. I put in an inquiry. Good. She looked at him. I'm scared, she said. I know I keep saying that. I know it's honest. I keep thinking, what if the thing I was good at was the company, specifically? What if I'm not good at anything else? That's not how it works, he said. You don't know that. I know that someone who can build what you built from a licensing deal at 23 is not going to run out of things to be good at. He looked at her steadily. I know that someone who can sit in a room full of people working against them and hand them a letter and say what they want to say, that person is going to find their footing. She looked at him for a long moment. You're not just saying that, she said. It wasn't a question exactly, more like confirming something she'd already decided. No, he said. Outside, a bus went by. A woman walked past with a stroller. A kid on a skateboard narrowly avoided a parking meter and kept going. Okay, Vivian said. She set down her mug and straightened slightly. Not the assembled armor straightening, just a person organizing themselves to take the next step. Okay. She picked up her phone and opened the apartment listing. Tell me about this neighborhood, she said, and turned the screen toward him. He looked at the listing. 3rd floor, 2 bedrooms, kitchen with a window, the chipped countertop just visible in one corner of the 4th photo. Good block, he said. I know a guy who lives 2 streets over. Quiet enough. Good transit. He paused. Maisie's school is 12 minutes from there. She looked up from the phone. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything about that last part. They didn't need to. It had already been said, in the particular language of people who have been paying close attention to each other for weeks. The language that doesn't require full sentences because the meaning is already somewhere in the room. She looked back at the listing. I'm going to set up a viewing, she said. Good idea. She typed the inquiry with both thumbs, unhurried, and hit send. The apartment on Calloway Street had a chip in the countertop exactly where the listing photo showed it, a bathroom faucet that ran cold for 30 seconds before the hot water arrived, a 3rd-floor view of a maple tree that was still holding its last October leaves, and a landlord named Mr. Petrakis, who was 70 years old, wore the same cardigan both times they visited, and asked Vivian 3 questions: whether she was employed, whether she had references, and whether she was a quiet neighbor. She answered honestly on all 3. Formerly employed, yes. References from her CFO and her lawyer, yes. Quiet. She thought about it. Probably quieter than she used to be. Mr. Petrakis looked at her for a moment, then at Daniel, then back at her. First of the month, he said, and handed her the lease. She signed it at the kitchen counter with the chipped edge, using a pen Mr. Petrakis produced from his cardigan pocket. Daniel stood by the window that looked out at the maple tree and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say. This was something she needed to do in her own hands, with her own name, without anyone managing it for her. She signed it. Mr. Petrakis countersigned. They shook hands. He left. She stood in the empty apartment for a moment with the lease in her hand. It smells like paint, she said. He probably just redid the walls. It's a good smell. She turned in a slow circle, looking at the corners, the windows, the unremarkable ceiling. The whole space was maybe 1/3 the size of the penthouse's living room alone. It's very small. It's a normal apartment. I know. She didn't say it like a complaint. She said it like someone recalibrating scale, adjusting their internal map of what things were supposed to be. I like it. She paused. I think I actually like it. Good. She folded the lease and put it in her bag. Outside the window, a leaf let go of the maple tree and went sideways on the wind before disappearing below the sill. I have no furniture, she said. That's what furniture stores are for. I've never been to a furniture store. He looked at her. I've had a decorator since I was 26, she said, entirely serious. I have never once picked out my own furniture. Daniel looked at the empty apartment, the bare floors, the walls the color of something that couldn't decide between cream and white, the bathroom with its 30-second hot water delay. He thought about what it meant to be 30 years old and have never once walked through a furniture store and decided what your own home was going to feel like. Saturday, he said. I'll take you. She looked at him with the expression he'd come to understand was her version of gratitude. Not effusive, not performed, just direct and real. Okay, she said. They went to a furniture place on Saturday. Maisie came because Maisie had strong opinions about furniture that she had not previously had occasion to express, and it turned out those opinions were extremely specific and occasionally contradictory. She told Vivian that the blue couch was the right color but the wrong shape, and that the gray one was the right shape but the wrong color, and that the answer was probably a green one in the back corner that neither of them had noticed yet, and she was right. Vivian stood in front of the green couch. Deep, practical green, slightly curved back, the kind of couch that looked like it had been designed for actual sitting rather than photographed catalog staging, and looked at it with her head tilted slightly and said, "That's it." "I told you," Maisie said, with the satisfaction of being correct. "You did." Vivian looked at her. "You have a good eye." "I know," Maisie said, and went to go look at lamps. Vivian watched her go. Then she looked at Daniel with something slightly undone in her expression. Not sad, not overwhelmed, just the look of someone who has been handed something ordinary and found it unexpectedly significant. "She's great," Vivian said quietly. "I know," he said, and meant it the same way Maisie had, not as a deflection, but as a fact too solid to require elaboration. They bought the green couch, a kitchen table that seated 4, a bookshelf that Vivian said she was going to fill with things she actually wanted to read, and not things that looked appropriate in an office, and a bed frame that Maisie declared acceptable after sitting on the display model and assessing its structural integrity with the seriousness of a building inspector. The whole afternoon was impractical and slow, and occasionally mildly frustrating when the measurements didn't work out the first time, and Maisie spilled a sample cup of complimentary coffee on herself at the checkout counter, and the delivery window they were given was a 4-hour range that Vivian looked at like it was a personal affront. 4 hours? She said. "That's normal," Daniel said. You just have to be available for 4 hours? Welcome to not having a personal assistant. She looked at the delivery confirmation on her phone. This is genuinely how people live? This is genuinely how people live. She stared at it for another second. Then she put her phone in her pocket. "Okay," she said. "Fine." He liked that. He liked the way she said okay and fine when she hit something ordinary that her previous life had insulated her from, not with irritation, not with the condescension of someone slumming it, but with the genuine recalibration of someone taking accurate measure of a world she hadn't been allowed to see clearly before. She moved into Callaway Street on a Tuesday in early November. The penthouse had been vacated 2 weeks prior. She'd worked with the company's property management to transfer it cleanly, and she'd kept very little of what was inside because almost nothing in it had been hers in any way that mattered. She took her books, her personal documents, 3 boxes of clothing she'd actually chosen herself, and a photograph from her parents' kitchen table that she'd had in the penthouse in a drawer because it didn't match the aesthetic. She unpacked the photograph first and put it on the kitchen windowsill, where it caught the morning light. Daniel helped her move the boxes. He'd borrowed a hand truck from the building's maintenance storage, which she thought was resourceful, and he thought was just practical, and they made 4 trips up the stairs because the elevator at Callaway Street was the size of a closet, and the green couch had not been negotiable. By the second trip, she had stopped asking if she could carry more and started just carrying more. And by the 4th trip, she had the particular slightly disheveled look of someone who had done physical work for the first time in a long time and found it unexpectedly satisfying. They put the couch in the right place on the first try. Maisie, who had come after school, declared this to be a good sign. "It's the right apartment," Maisie said, standing in the middle of it with her hands on her hips in the posture she'd adopted when she wanted to sound authoritative. "It has good light." "Thank you," Vivian said. "You should put a plant by that window." "I'll kill it." "You probably will the first time," Maisie said reasonably. "But then you learn." Vivian looked at her with an expression Daniel had started to recognize as specific to Maisie, a sort of amused helplessness in the face of being told something true in a very uncomplicated way. "Okay," she said. "I'll get a plant." They ordered pizza, because it was the right answer to moving day, and ate it on the green couch with the boxes still stacked along one wall, and the bookshelf still empty and the kitchen table assembled but not yet fully in its place. Maisie ate 2 slices and then fell asleep on the end of the couch, with her jacket still on. The way children do when they've run out of energy without any warning, like a phone that goes from 30% to zero with no intermediate step. Daniel and Vivian sat with their pizza and the specific quiet of a place that was just starting to become something. "Thank you," she said, "for today." It was pizza and a hand truck. It was more than that, and you know it. She said it simply, not making it heavy. "I've been trying to figure out how to say something, and I keep coming out wrong on it, so I'm just going to say it plainly." "Okay." "I don't want to mistake what this is," she said. "I've done that before. I've taken something that fit neatly into what I needed at a specific moment and called it something bigger than it was. And I don't want to do that to you." She paused. "So I need to ask you honestly, what is this? For you?" He looked at Maisie asleep on the end of the couch, jacket still on. "It's not a specific moment," he said. "It's been 6 weeks, and the specific moment passed about 5 weeks ago." He looked at Vivian. "What it is for me is the thing that happens when you actually pay attention to someone over time and you keep finding out they're worth paying attention to." He paused. "That's probably not a very romantic way to say it." "No," she said. "It's exactly the right way to say it." She was close enough that the space between them was a decision. He didn't make it immediately. He looked at her for a moment. The impractical, honest person who had sat barefoot on a cold balcony 6 weeks ago and asked a maintenance worker to stay. And she looked back at him with the full attention she brought to everything. Nothing managed, nothing armored. He leaned across and kissed her, brief and unhurried. She didn't pull back. When he sat back, she said very quietly, "I've been waiting for that for about 3 weeks. Why didn't you say something? I was afraid you'd be sensible about it." He almost laughed. "I'm not that sensible. I'm starting to figure that out." Maisie made a small sound in her sleep and shifted, pulling her jacket tighter, and they both looked at her and then back at each other, and neither of them said anything for a while because there wasn't anything necessary to say. The months that followed were not a straight line. Vivian spent December untangling herself from 7 years of a life that had been built entirely around a single identity, and the untangling was slow and occasionally painful in the specific way that any removal is painful when the thing being removed has been load-bearing. The divorce was handled through lawyers. Marcus had retained someone aggressive and expensive, which her lawyer called predictable, and there were several weeks of back and forth that she described to Daniel in brief, controlled summaries that he understood meant she was managing it by keeping it small in the telling. She came to his apartment for dinner on a Wednesday in late December and sat at his kitchen table while he made pasta and said, very flatly, he tried to claim a portion of the intellectual property I developed before we were married, the licensing deal, the original framework the whole company was built on. Daniel set down the wooden spoon. Can he do that? His lawyer tried. She was turning a fork over in her hands. Mine stopped it in about 40 minutes. A pause. But the fact that he tried, that he looked at the thing I made at 23 before I even knew him and thought he could take a piece of it, she stopped. I keep trying not to feel that, and then I feel it anyway. You're allowed to feel it, he said. I know. She set the fork down. It's just, at a certain point, I want to be done being hurt by it. I want the whole thing to just be finished. It will be. I know that too. She looked at him. I just want the finished part now. I know, she sighed. You always know. I've been where you are. In the divorce stuff? In the part where you're angry and you want to skip to the part where you're not anymore. He went back to the pasta. You can't. You just have to go through the middle. She was quiet for a while. Maisie appeared from the hallway where she'd been doing homework and asked if she could set the table, which she offered to do with the specific tone of someone who wanted to be part of what was happening in the room. And Vivian said yes and moved her things to make space. And Maisie set 3 places at the table with the focused domesticity she sometimes displayed when she had decided something was normal and wanted to confirm it by acting accordingly. They ate pasta. Maisie explained her latest findings on bioluminescent deep-sea organisms. Vivian asked 3 follow-up questions that were genuine and specific, and Maisie answered all of them with the satisfaction of someone whose areas of expertise were being taken seriously. It was ordinary. Daniel thought about how long it had been since ordinary felt like enough. It felt like enough. The workshop idea came from something that happened in January. Vivian had been spending her days with a structure she was still building from scratch. She read in the mornings, she walked, she cooked things she was still learning to cook. She went through what she described as the administrative archaeology of a life that had been managed by other people for years. Occasionally, she went to her CFO, who had taken a position with a small investment firm and who met her for coffee twice a week, and they talked about the industry with the freedom of people who no longer had a stake in it. In January, she ran into someone outside a coffee shop, a young woman, mid-20s, who had been at Harlow Innovations 3 years earlier as a junior analyst before the company had cut her entire department in a budget restructure. She recognized Vivian. She was carrying a portfolio case and looked like someone in the middle of trying to do something hard. They talked for 20 minutes on the sidewalk. The young woman, her name was Claire, was working on building a consulting practice and couldn't figure out how to structure her pricing or articulate her value proposition without sounding either too cheap or too arrogant. And she was in the particular kind of stuck that comes from having real skill and no framework for how to present it to the world. Vivian spent 20 minutes doing, without thinking about it, exactly what she was good at: listening, asking the right question, pointing at the gap between what Claire was offering and how she was describing it. When she got home, she sat in her apartment with the chipped countertop and the green couch and thought about those 20 minutes. She called Daniel. "I think I want to do the workshop thing," she said. "Yeah? I've been sitting on it for 2 months thinking it was too small, too different from what I was doing." A pause. "I just spent 20 minutes with a young woman who is genuinely good at what she does and has no idea how to make anyone else see it. And I could see it in about 4 questions. I knew exactly where the disconnect was." Another pause. "That's not nothing. That's something I can actually do." "I told you that in October." "I know you did. I wasn't ready to hear it in October." He could hear her moving around her apartment. He recognized the sound of it now, the particular acoustics of the Callaway Street place, the way her voice changed slightly when she was near the kitchen window versus the living room. "Where?" he asked. "There's a community center 12 blocks from here. I looked it up last week. They have space available for programs on Tuesday and Thursday evenings." She paused. "I went in today. They were very confused about who I was, which I found oddly freeing. I was just a person who wanted to run a workshop series on sustainable business development for people starting or rebuilding small enterprises." "What did they say?" "They said yes, and asked if I could start in March, and gave me a form to fill out." She paused. "It took me 40 minutes to fill out because the form was designed for people with different backgrounds, and I kept reading questions that assumed things I no longer had." Another pause. "I filled it out as Vivian Harlow, former founder, current nobody, available Tuesdays and Thursdays." He was quiet for a moment. "How did that feel?" "Strange," she said. "And correct." She paused again. "I want to build something that helps people do this without destroying themselves, without making the thing into the reason, without ending up—" She stopped. "Without ending up where I did." "Then do that." "I might be terrible at teaching." "You won't be. You don't know. I know what you did in 20 minutes with someone you'd met on a sidewalk. You won't be terrible." She was quiet. "March," she said. "March," he agreed. The workshop filled in 2 weeks. 14 people signed up. Small business owners, freelancers, a woman who'd been laid off after 18 years and was building something new, a man in his 40s trying to turn a side skill into a livable income. Vivian spent February preparing with the same intensity she'd brought to board presentations, except different. Less armored, more personal, more willing to include the things that hadn't worked alongside the things that had. She told Daniel about the first session the night it happened, calling him from Callaway Street at 9:30 with the slightly breathless quality of someone who had just discovered something. "They stayed 40 minutes past the end time," she said. "I had to tell them to go home." He smiled at the ceiling. "Was it good?" "It was." She was clearly trying to find an accurate word. "Real. It felt real. I said things that were true, and people responded like they were true, not like they were managing my image or protecting their position. They just said things back." She paused. One woman told me she'd been afraid to price her work at what it was worth because she thought people would think she was too big for her situation. And I told her that was a story someone had put in her head to keep her manageable, and that her job was to find out who had put it there and stop listening to them. She stopped. She cried a little, and then she said she was going to raise her prices on Monday. Good. I know. Her voice had something in it he hadn't heard before. It's quieter than her professional certainty, more open. I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I don't know if that sounds... I know that's a large thing to say about a Tuesday night workshop. It doesn't sound large, he said. It sounds accurate. She breathed out. I have 14 people next week. I think word's getting out. The community center coordinator said they've had 3 more inquiries. Not bad for a former nobody. She laughed. Not bad. Spring came and brought with it the final dissolution of her marriage. The last paperwork signed on a Tuesday morning in her lawyer's office on the 14th floor of a building she'd never been in before. She signed her name on several documents. Her lawyer shook her hand. She walked out into the March air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment and took inventory of how she felt. She called Daniel. It's done, she said. Okay, he said. He was at work. She could hear the building sounds behind him. How are you? She thought about it carefully. Lighter, she said. That's the right word. I feel lighter. Good. I thought I'd feel worse. I kept expecting worse. You'd already done most of the hard part, he said. The signing was just paperwork. She stood on the sidewalk with her phone and the March wind and the particular morning sun that was still deciding how warm it wanted to be. Do you want to have dinner tonight? She asked. The 3 of us. Yeah, he said. I'll tell Maisie. She's been asking about that new pizza place on Clement. Of course she has. She's been strategically mentioning it for about 2 weeks. This is probably her play paying off. Vivian smiled. She's very good at the long game. She gets it from somewhere. The implication landed comfortably between them. She didn't deflect it. I'll see you tonight, she said. Tonight. She put the phone in her pocket and walked east toward Callaway Street in the March morning, without a driver and without a schedule and without anything optimized, just her own 2 feet on the sidewalk doing the straightforward work of carrying her from one place to another. It was enough. 2 years is not a very long time, and it is also a very long time depending on what fills it. What filled it, 14 workshop participants became 30, then 60, then a waiting list. Vivian partnered with the community center to develop a 6-month curriculum that the coordinator, a small, fierce woman named Rosa, called the most practically useful thing they'd ever offered. She brought in 2 of her former colleagues as guest speakers, people who'd built things and broken things and rebuilt them and were willing to say so out loud. She turned down 3 offers from former industry contacts to return to corporate consulting. She turned them down cleanly, without the second-guessing she'd expected. The turning down got easier each time, which told her something about the direction she was facing. She learned to drive. This happened slowly, in Daniel's truck, on Sunday mornings in an empty parking lot behind a closed hardware store, with Maisie in the back seat, offering commentary that was occasionally helpful and consistently entertaining. She stalled the truck 4 times in the first session, twice in the second, and not at all in the third. She did not immediately master highway merging. She was working on it. The shimmy in the truck got diagnosed, a worn front suspension component, a $200 fix, and she offered to pay for it. And Daniel said absolutely not. And she argued briefly, and he said she could buy the coffee for the next month to settle the score, and she did. Maisie turned 9 and decided that her marine biology career focus now specifically included deep-sea research vessels, and she wanted to know if anyone she knew had contacts in oceanographic institutions. Vivian, who had attended 3 industry conferences in the past 2 years and had built an unexpectedly broad network through the workshops, made 2 calls and got Maisie the email address of a research coordinator at a marine science institute who agreed to answer questions from a 9-year-old with an interest in bioluminescent organisms. Maisie sent a 6-paragraph email that the coordinator described as the most organized inquiry she'd received in a year and responded accordingly. Daniel heard about this from Maisie first and from Vivian an hour later. He sat in his apartment that evening after Maisie was in bed and thought about the version of himself from 2 years ago, standing in a lobby at midnight with a maintenance bag, getting into an elevator to go check on a floor he'd only been to twice, entirely unaware that the next thing he was about to do was the thing that would change everything. That was the part nobody told you about the moments that mattered. They didn't announce themselves. They came in through the unremarkable door, a late-night call, an uncomfortable task, a person sitting barefoot on a cold balcony who looked like she needed someone to stay. The decision to stay was the whole thing. Everything else was what grew from that. On an evening in late October, 2 years and a few weeks from the night it had started, the three of them were in Vivian's apartment on Calloway Street. The bookshelf was full now. The kitchen windowsill had 3 plants, 2 of which had survived the initial learning curve and 1 of which was new, on a kind of probationary status. The green couch had a small stain on one armrest from an incident involving Maisie and a juice box that had never been fully explained. The photograph from Vivian's parents' kitchen was still on the windowsill, and beside it now was a second photograph. The 3 of them at the park, the one with the dried-up fountain where the confused frog had been, taken by a stranger Maisie had approached with Daniel's phone and directed with complete confidence. They were making dinner, which was an activity that still sometimes involved Vivian reading the recipe out loud to herself 3 times before proceeding, and Maisie standing on a step stool to reach the counter because she'd decided she was going to learn to cook this year with the same categorical certainty she brought to all her decisions. "It says a 1/4 teaspoon of salt," Maisie said, holding the measuring spoon with scientific precision. "That's probably not enough," Vivian said. "The recipe says, the recipe is optimized for the median palate. We are not median palates." Maisie considered this. "How much more?" "Start with 1/2 teaspoon and taste." Maisie added the extra salt with the focused seriousness of someone conducting an experiment. She tasted. "You're right," she said, with the equanimity of someone who is fine with being wrong because the being wrong had resulted in useful information. Daniel was chopping vegetables at the other end of the counter and not saying anything because he'd learned that the cooking conversations between Vivian and Maisie were their own thing, something that had developed between them in the way that things develop between people who spend real time together and find their own frequency. He didn't need to be in the middle of it. He was glad it existed. He had thought about timing for a couple of weeks, not obsessively, just periodically, the way you think about something that's already decided and just needs the right moment to be said out loud. After dinner, Maisie was on the couch with her book and Vivian was washing dishes and Daniel was drying them. They'd arrived at this division of labor organically, without discussion, the way comfortable domestic patterns do. And he said without particular preamble, "I want to ask you something." She looked at him sideways. "That sounds serious." "It's not bad serious." He put the plate he was drying on the stack. "I want to know if this is what you want. Not what you think you should want. Not what makes sense from a certain angle. What you actually want." She turned off the water and turned to face him. Maisie had not looked up from her book, but he was aware of the particular quality of a 9-year-old pretending to read. "I want this," Vivian said, plainly, directly, with no management of how it landed. "I want the apartment, and the chipped counter, and the plants I keep killing, and the dinner, and—" She stopped and looked at the couch, where Maisie had now given up the pretense and was watching them openly. "And that." She looked back at him. "I want all of it. I want the ordinary version of it. I'm not going to pretend I don't." Maisie put her book down entirely. "Are you going to ask her to marry you?" Maisie said. Daniel looked at his daughter. "I was working up to something in that direction," he said. "That's what I thought." Maisie picked her book back up. "I think you should, for the record." She turned a page. "I already told Grandma Helen I thought this was where it was going. She said she thought so too." "You told my mother?" "She asked," Maisie said serenely. Vivian was looking at him with an expression that was trying not to be a smile and failing. He didn't have a ring. He hadn't gone to that particular length of preparation because that wasn't who he was. He was a person who fixed things and made eggs at midnight and drove a truck with a shimmy and showed up. And showing up was the thing, not the presentation of showing up. He thought she knew that. He thought she'd prefer it. "So?" he said. "What do you think?" She looked at him. The kitchen was warm. The photograph on the windowsill caught the light. Maisie was not reading her book. "I think yes," Vivian said. "I've thought yes for about 6 months, if I'm being completely honest." "You could have said something." "You're the one who had to decide," she said. "This wasn't mine to ask. You had—" She glanced at the couch. "You had more to consider." He looked at Maisie, who had put the book fully down now and was sitting cross-legged on the green couch with her hands in her lap, waiting, and had the expression she wore when she'd already decided how she felt about something and was just waiting for the adults to catch up. "What do you think?" he asked her. "I already told you what I think," Maisie said. "I gave you my answer 2 minutes ago. I also gave you a heads up at the park 2 years ago when I said I liked her, which should have been useful information." "It was useful information." "I know it was." She looked at Vivian. "Are you going to learn to drive better before the wedding? Because right now the parking lot sessions are still pretty rough." "Maisie," Daniel said, "it's a fair question." Vivian laughed. The real one. The unguarded one he'd first heard in her kitchen over a grain bowl critique. The one that still happened when something was genuinely funny and she wasn't thinking about how it sounded. "I'm working on the merging," she said. "Okay," Maisie said, and picked up her book again, apparently satisfied that the adults had gotten themselves sorted. The thing about starting over, really starting over, not the polished narrative version of it, but the actual daily lived version, is that it's mostly small. It's a chip in a countertop. It's a plant that dies and gets replaced. It's learning that the hot water takes 30 seconds and planning around it instead of calling someone to fix it. It's the going to sleep and waking up in the same place 2 days in a row, then a week, then a month, until the place starts to feel like it belongs to you. Vivian had built an empire once by running towards something enormous. She had run so hard and so far that by the time she stopped, she was standing at the top of a building she owned, completely alone, with a shattered wine glass on the wall and no one to call. What she'd found on the other side of that wasn't smaller. It was more accurate. It was a life size to an actual human being instead of an idea of one. It was dinner on a Tuesday, and a plant on a windowsill, and a 9-year-old on a green couch who had decided, with the clean certainty she brought to everything, that this was how it was supposed to be. The workshops ran every Tuesday and Thursday. The waiting list was 43 people long. A woman from the second cohort had opened a consulting practice and hired 2 people. A man from the third had taken his pricing structure from the floor to something that actually covered his labor. Rosa at the community center told Vivian that 3 people had told her the workshop had saved their businesses, and Vivian had said she didn't think that was quite right, that people saved their own businesses. The workshop just helped them see where the walls were. And Rosa had looked at her and said, "That's the same thing, you just don't want the credit." Maybe. Or maybe the distinction mattered. Maybe the whole point was that the people in those chairs already had what they needed, and what they were missing was someone who had actually lost something real and come back from it, who could say without performance or salesmanship, "It's not the thing you built that defines you, it's what you do with the knowing." Vivian had learned that the hard way. She figured it was worth passing on. Daniel still worked maintenance at Harlow Tower because the work was steady and he was good at it, and there was something clarifying about a job where broken things told you exactly what they needed. He'd taken on a supervisory role after 18 months, a small addition to his title, a small addition to his paycheck, not a transformation, just a recognition of what had always been true. He was the person you called when something needed fixing and you needed it done right. He thought sometimes about the elevator ride up to the 53rd floor on a night that had been nobody's idea of an important night. He thought about how the calculation had been simple. She's hurt, she's alone, I'm here. Nothing more sophisticated than that. He wasn't a rescuer. He was clear about that, and so was she. He hadn't pulled her out of anything she wasn't already pulling herself out of. He'd just been present while it happened, which turned out to be the thing she'd needed most. Not a solution, not a strategy, just a person who showed up and stayed. He thought there was something in that worth knowing. That sometimes the most important decision you make is the one that doesn't feel like a decision at all, just the basic human instinct to not leave someone alone in a hard moment. That the things which matter most don't always arrive with a signal. Sometimes they arrive at midnight, through a maintenance door, with a first aid kit and a pan of scrambled eggs. Sometimes they're already exactly what they need to be, and all that's required of you is to not walk away. Outside the Callaway Street window, the October maple was doing what it had done the first day, holding its leaves as long as possible, letting them go one at a time, bright and particular against the gray city sky. The apartment was warm. The photograph on the windowsill was lit by the early evening light. In the living room, Maisie was reading about deep-sea organisms on a green couch that had been chosen by a 7-year-old with a very good eye, in a home that belonged to a woman who had learned to want ordinary things, beside a man who had always known their value. She once ruled an empire. Now she finally lived. And the living, it turned out, was the whole point. Not the arrival, not the title, not the number in the account or the view from the 53rd floor, but the Tuesday nights and the chipped countertops and the plant on the windowsill that was still on probation and the child who saw clearly and the man who stayed. That was the empire worth building. That was the one that lasted.